Now, for years, we've known that the U.S. military used music as a means of torture at secret prisons abroad and at Guantanamo Bay. Now, some of the bands include Metallica, Rage Against the Machine, even Britney Spears, and they even used the Barney theme song. Now, according to Clive Stafford Smith in the Guardian newspaper, a U.S. military advisor claimed that it was God who first tortured enemies by music, referring to the biblical story when Joshua's army used horns to strike fear into the hearts of the people of Jericho. But how does the military choose its music? They certainly have never asked the artists for permission beforehand. So when Canadian band Skinny Puppy learned that their music was being used, they didn't send a cease and desist letter, as other groups have in the past. No, they actually sent an invoice. That's right, they asked the U.S. government to pay them for the music that they had used to torture detainees. So joining me now to explain their decision is Kevin Ogilvie from the band Skinny Puppy. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on with all these wonderful voices.
So, Ogre, as I mentioned, there are some of these other bands, Metallica, Rage Against the Machine. I mean, that's stuff that we found out about years ago. So when did Skinny Puppy find out that your music had been used in this way? And how did you find out?
We have a long history of exploring this subject. We started back in 2004 with The Greater Wrong of the Right, our album with an accompanying DVD where we did an expose on depleted uranium being used on the battlefield in the Gulf War and the effects on both soldiers and civilians living in the area. And we worked closely, did interviews with Ramsey Clark, who was the Attorney General under LBJ, and Steve Robinson from the Veterans Administration, to kind of expose the fact that even though we as a nation say that we don't use nuclear war as an option, the weapon is still being used through these depleted uranium shells on the battlefield, which are tank busters, which end up vaporizing and spreading radioisotopes everywhere. And from that, we, through the Veterans Administration, unfortunately, a lot of the soldiers, the people on the ground, are just people like us, in the sense of they're civilians doing a job in a very dangerous environment, and weren't getting the treatment they needed when they got back from the theater of war. And that kind of started a roller coaster for us in exploring kind of what I see as a certain deviant behavior within the U.S. government, especially the Department of Defense, with regards to putting their soldiers in more danger. And that progressed to finding out from a soldier, Terry Holbrooks, who was stationed in Guantanamo, and he heard our music being used, not album versions of our music, but actually bootleg music being used to torture in rendition, in the sense of a person being put into a cold room, shackled, and put into a prone position until they defecated, and our music was being played over and over in their heads. So we decided at that point to make a record called Weapon. The idea originally was to make a record with a narrative that included music to torture people, and then take it out in the road with some circus sideshow people and actually waterboard and force feed people, et cetera, et cetera. The album kind of got abstracted a bit more, in the sense that, we live in a society that's infatuated with weapons, and we also have allowed the propagation of nuclear energy, which was, again, sold to us in the last century as a very cheap form of energy and a very clean source of energy, which has turned out to be anything but. And we have, hundreds of these plants all over our country, not to mention in Fukushima, Japan, which are.
Let me just interrupt you. Let me just interrupt you for a moment there, Ogre. And I can't believe that, after all that, as you mentioned, that the military didn't even have the decency to purchase an album and instead used a bootleg copy of your music. But, when you found out about that, how did you feel? What's your position on torture?
Well, I'm very against torture. I think more so than anything, I think if that's what we're doing, if we have these rendition off-site torture camps, and again, we present to our population the idea that we do not torture people, but we do, then obviously I think that puts our men and women at risk far more than anything the NSA has done. Or I'm sorry, Edward Snowden has done with regards to the NSA or any of the leaks that have come out about, what has been going on. That to me is far more dangerous to our men and women working in the field. Far more invasive on their mindsets too. I mean, being a soldier and knowing all of this, as Terry Holbrooks did, for example, it messed with his mind. You talk about post-traumatic stress. He's going in for his treatment today based on what he saw at Guantanamo and the conditions and the treatment of a lot of the people there, based on the fact that we have these protocols in place that allow people to kind of go off the rails with what they really should be doing there. And again, there's not very much information that's been gained by this torture. These sweeps have brought in mostly innocent civilians from these countries, or again, with tribal battles, someone will point out somebody that they just have some
well at this point
problem
too,
with,
we're all
be swept up.
We're all still waiting on on a 6,000 plus page report within the Senate that they commissioned, really investigating these torture techniques, other harsh interrogation techniques.
Well, I mean,
but I'm just saying that that's something that is we should be highly critical too of the U.S. government here, and the fact that they won't release this information to the public. But Ogre, tell me more about this this invoice, because I like your style is what I'm saying. Other bands kind of asked politely for the U.S. government to stop doing this. You actually just said, fine, we're going to bill you. How much was the invoice for?
Well, we chose, as we did in an album on Vivisection in 1987, we used the title of the album Vivisect 6, which was the idea of Roman numerals 666. So we chose to define this as something quite evil in a Judeo-Christian society. And so we chose $666,000 to bill them for illegally using and downloading bootleg music to torture people.
And did you ever get a response?
Of course not. Jason Leopold, who works for Al Jazeera and Vice and works closely with Terry Holbrooks, has sent in numerous Freedom of Information requests for a list of music of the bands being tortured. And that's why I want to comment on this 6,000-page report, which sounds like an obfuscation penetration report more than anything. If they can't answer Freedom of Information reports, then I doubt that this report is going to have much more than a lot of redacted garbage.
By the way, I just want to pull up a comment here from Kringle, one of our viewers, regarding the payout if you ever were to get one from the government too. He says, I wager that they'll fudge the numbers to minimize payout, aka call it a matter of national security, of which I have no doubt. All right, Ogre, I want to thank you so much. Or actually, I have one more question for you before we go here, because we do have some pictures that we've been playing of your band, and some people would say that maybe your music is a little aggressive, that maybe some of your onstage antics and costumes and things like this oddly seem appropriate to be used, in a setting like that. What's your response to those people?
Well, I think you've chosen some really horrible pictures. I sent some pictures from our latest show, which is more having to do with the mutation aspect of radiation. So yes, we've certainly explored a lot of maybe confrontational and somewhat visionary aspects of things, using kind of bash you over the head tactics. But again, I sent you different pictures. You chose to use those pictures. Yes, we use blood. We use a lot of theatrics to expose the underbelly of what we see as a very dark society that is existing under a huge eye. So, all
right. Well, so, yeah, I'm sorry we didn't get all your pictures in there.
No worries.
Nothing personal.
No, it's fine.
All right.
Show it like it is.